do, and it's, obviously I was asked to do this by Leeds University, but I feel that our real job is to pass on, if possible, anything of what we were given. In other words, that in some way one can keep the best of having worked with Harold a lot. One can keep that by giving it away. You know, one can sort of hang on to the very best of it by sharing it. I just have a feeling that works as a philosophy. So,
yes, I mean the fact that nobody's who's young now will ever work with Harold is yeah.
And that's exactly why I made that documentary, because I wanted there to be an archival resource, really, so that people could put the film on and have a feeling of being in the room with him, and how unique that was, and what his values were, because I know that that's important to you too. That, I mean, the range of the roles that you played is just remarkable. I mean, Rebecca in Ashes, Ruth in The Homecoming, Prue in Celebration, and Rose in The Room. I mean, what an amazing range. It makes, I remember Harold somewhere saying that he felt that, God was doing his best work. God was in good trim when he made Woman, because he felt that women were just made of slightly higher quality stuff than men. But those women characters are made of just the most extraordinary, diverse and ranging substance.
Yes. And look, I think I would have played identical roles for Harold for the whole of my life if I could, because, and I know you understand that he inspired a devotion. I mean, to me, it's a devotion. And very few people do that. We all work and collaborate widely, and we have great relationships with a wide range of people, which is a great thing about what we do. But sometimes, if you're lucky, you meet someone like Harold and you get the chance to do more than one piece of work, and you get the chance to be with him while working on his writing. And that is without doubt one of the great privileges of my life. And I mean life as well as work. So the range has been great. And there was a sort of a personal delight, I think, for Harold as well as for me in doing that double bill, because he absolutely adored the idea of this huge transformation from Rose to Prue. It was just a physical transformation. And again, as would come up in any discussion of Harold, because he was always and to the end an actor as well as a writer and director. He loved that process of transformation, whether it's through writing, whether it's through a look. And he had it wasn't glee. I don't know about glee in Harold, but certainly a deep satisfaction in knowing that he would get actors to transform completely. And that double bill, it was his beginning and almost his end, in terms of writing. And to have those two pieces of work side by side was wonderful for him, of course, to see what, where he began and how much he still had to say. And that he had different means for saying it, and that he could really provoke and entertain at the same time. That was very satisfying for him. And to be in both of them, well, exactly, you know, the same, really. And it becomes to be in a company that's doing two plays becomes a very moving experience, because you're carrying the work of this great writer from beginning to end. Just, I mean, you could call them snapshots. They're not. To me, they're plays, but to have them side by side, and you don't often get that opportunity. But because he could write short but deep, it was possible to have those two side by side, and made for a very, very interesting piece of work, and something I think that made him proud and happy.
You took it to New York, the double bill.
Yes, where it had a very different reaction.
Well, quite.
Yeah. I mean, I've had this experience with Harold's work before, taking it out of this country. And I don't know, you know, people can make, you know, come to different conclusions about that. But certainly with Celebration, we played to what I'm accustomed to here as a kind of respectful and sometimes slightly resentful silence. Yes, in England. Of course, there would sometimes be fantastic reactions, but I've had that experience more than once. And then we took it to New York, and it was a riot. Celebration. I mean, they laughed and laughed and laughed. And, you know, I've talked about this, we talked about it, you know, amongst ourselves when we were doing it, but whether it was because, you know, money is the driver in America. I mean, it really, really is. And they recognize their own. They see it. And so those characters came zinging out. And that was fantastic, because everything that Harold had illustrated there with these people came to life and was understood, and they found it funny. And Harold was always funny. Any great writer is funny, as well as being lacerating, angry, moving. He was always funny. And that was great. And to go to another play, I had a similar experience with Ashes to Ashes, where we did it in London for the first time ever. And as you know, it's a profoundly mysterious play. And it's impossible to articulate everything about that play. And why would you? I mean, it's interesting to discuss, but the experience is the thing. And in London, it was sticky sometimes, you know. It felt, and it could have been us as well. It was a new and very, very difficult play. And, you know, maybe we hadn't completely delivered it. I don't know. But when we took it to Barcelona to a Pinter festival, and you know, the reaction was just almost overwhelming. There was such an appetite for it. There was such a passionate response to it. And Stephen Ray and I went to the bar afterwards. And of course, a festival has a very particular kind of atmosphere. People go because they're already interested. They're not going out of a checklist kind of duty, you know, the old cliche about a Pinter play. According to Sondheim, you know, it's not a cultural checklist. People go because they really, really want to. And there was a great age range. And so many people stayed behind because they wanted to talk about this play, about what because it is mysterious and it doesn't make itself available. It's challenging, but it's interesting how in some countries, in some contexts, people are hungry for that challenge. And sometimes there's a resistance about which Harold was very aware. You know, he said to us, you know, some people really hate my work, and you know, you're going to be in the firing line. And it was said with typical Harold gravitas. There was not a shred of self-pity or anger. I love that about Harold. It was a fact. It was simply a fact. And because we were all in it together, and Harold felt that we should be armed. And that was a typically astute and generous. So, you know, it's very interesting. I think all art meets with a massive range of responses. And live performance is, you know it very quickly, don't you? You know what's happening. And so I feel you know, lucky to have had that experience of playing in different situations the same play. And of course, Harold saw his work done all over the world, sometimes to his horror and dismay. But you know, any writer who's successful has to deal with that. And but yeah, it was interesting to see different reactions.
I remember him telling me about going to see a production of The Homecoming in Paris and realizing that quite a large chunk had been cut. And he said to the director afterwards, "You cut my play." And the chap said, "Ah, yes, well, Monsieur Pinter, in that particular section, you appear to imitate yourself. So we felt it was." Said, "Put it back in." But you know, yeah, he told me a few of those stories about being abroad and being quite stunned as to what he was being confronted with. When were you first? Sorry, go on.
No, but just stunned that anyone would say that.
Well, quite. But you know, he knew very well that it's in Europe, a director has a different role in many ways, and a writer's work is often sort of consumed as part of the creative process rather than honoured. It's somewhat reconstituted.
And of course, that is, you know, despite sometimes feeling and you know, the inability of an audience to meet Harold's work openly, we certainly do have respect for the writer, and that's why it's a wonderful place to exist as a writer primarily, and also as a performer and as a director, I think, because then it is a true collaboration, because your focus is the writing. And how are you going to literally discover it and hand it over? And that's the most thrilling process, especially when you are dealing with work of such quality and originality as Harold's, that you know, and of course he as a director was, I think, incredibly discreet. It was as if he could stand separately and respect his own work, because as he respected other actors, I think he respected writers, and in a weird way, he could almost separate himself from his own play and stand back and and think, here is the work, here are these actors who I respect, and let's see what occurs. And he didn't muddle or control, in my experience. He had the gift which any good director has of a laser-like concentration. And I think he had that in his life as well. He never had just sort of casual moments with Harold. Well, they couldn't, but he was on. He listened to you. And when he spoke, even in the bar, he spoke with care. Care for you as the recipient and care for himself as the person choosing to convey something. And it could be funny or it could be serious, but it was intended always. And so as a director, it was fascinating to see him stand back from his work. And I think he has said, hasn't he, that when he's writing, and lots of writers do say this, that these people come. He doesn't know always where they come from, but they are a very, very powerful, undeniable presence when he's writing. And he goes with them. And, there's a mystery.
Mm-hmm.
But it isn't just, well, they can do what they like. They're there. But then he, as the brilliant writer that he was, will then use these powerful presences in his writing head and heart and then construct a play. And I think when he was in the room as a director, he had the same sort of combination of skills, that he could stand back and let things happen and allow himself to be surprised, delighted, hopefully, by what happened to these people when they were fleshed out by actors.
Yeah, that's an incredible gift.
It's such a gift. Such a gift. Remarkable. And so I find an unnecessary amount of interference in Harold's writing quite frustrating, is putting it mildly.
Yeah.
Because he was open enough. You didn't have to worship at a shrine to work with Harold. He just wanted honest work, and to to look at what he'd written. But I've said this before somewhere, but when we were doing oh God, I forgot the name of it now. His last play. When we were doing Celebration, there was a confusion amongst the group about what class we were supposed to be. And people got a bit nervous about asking Harold how would we, sound. And because I think, the other people, Andy de la Tour certainly worked with Harold. But anyway, I was, sent really to Harold to ask him.
Delegated.
I delegated by the group. What class are these people? And as the words left my lips, I thought, oh God, why? Sometimes you get into a little bit of mud when you're when you're rehearsing, as you know. And, it was just one of those muddy moments, and really we should have taken stock ourselves. But he just said, well, I refer you to the text. And of course, as always with good writing, Shakespeare, say the words Don't get in the way, especially early on. Say the words, have them in your mouth, have them in your head, have them in your heart, wherever. But do that, and they will tell you what you need to know. Mm. So I felt slightly humiliated. That was not his intention, but I thought, oh, come on, you should know better. You know, I really felt I should have known better. We should all have known better as actors. But it was done economically, as was everything with Harold. And he was right. But sometimes he would say, well, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what the writer intended there. Which again is so typical of Harold, how honest he was, and how he would definitely have that in his head as let's see, because he believed that a line should be there, but he didn't have a definitive answer. And again, one of the things that I absolutely adore about his writing is that you cannot label everything. You can't pick it apart and label everything with an intention, because you will lose something. It's a complex process. I'm not expressing this very well, but it's both simple and complex at the same time.
Are you talking about making choices as an actor, about finding the right approach to a line?
Well, I'm thinking about yes, acting in Harold's work. I'm thinking as well about being in the audience, and I'm thinking about even, examining his work, academic examinations. It's all there to be done. But I think there are always things that, these plays are meant to be performed, and they will be performed differently and, hopefully equally well often. But I think thinking you can locate every single thought that a character has is missing something, because he knew perfectly well that we as human beings are a mass of contradictions, and he embodied that himself. And one could go into Harold's personality forever, because he's so vivid, isn't he? So vivid. He could be in the room now. I wish he were.
It's a wonderful word, vivid. His presence.
His presence was so vivid because he didn't generalize. Most of us do a lot of generalizing in our being, with other people, socially. And he didn't do that. He didn't generalize in his work, and he didn't generalize in himself. He was specific. Mm. And yet he admitted that some things were impossible to articulate. And, some of the huge darkness in Ashes to Ashes has to remain unlabeled. You just have to hope that you can roll it all up and roll it out to an audience, and that they will let go enough to receive it for what it is.
That's a very good way of putting it, that the audience have to, in some way, surrender I mean, that's true of any play, of course, that
Yeah.
when the lights go down and the curtain goes up, something, if anything's going to happen in between the stage and the auditoriums, then everyone's got to surrender what? They've got to surrender reality. They've got to surrender, whatever you've come in with. But with Harold, all these things that one could say about everything are always that much more acute.
Definitely, yes. It's the concentration, the essence of everything, which Harold was able to put into his writing, whether it was as mysterious as Ashes to Ashes, or whether it had, narrative, like many of his plays, and a lot of humour.
Tell me how you first met Harold's work. I mean, before you trained, before you met him, how did you know about Pinter?
Well, quite weirdly, and I don't remember this very, very clearly, but it's something to do with some youth club when I was very young. I was a teenager in Birmingham. That somebody decided to do The Room. How bizarre is that? I'm frustrated that I can't remember everything about it, like who, what, because that was, jumping off into deep waters with people who knew absolutely nothing. But I think, by then, I knew that drama, which is the only word I had to describe it, had an attraction for me. So actually, I did play Rose.
That's amazing.
As a teenager.
Wow.
In some amateur-y thing in it, probably our church hall or something. And without the foggiest idea. But, I do hold to this. If you don't get in the way with Harold, at some level, if you don't interfere too much and you say those words and you don't hang around and you say all those words, something will happen.
Yeah.
Because every word carries something. Every word. And the combination of the words and the situation, all of it that writing is ever about. But with Harold, spare.
Yeah. I mean, Doug Hodge was talking the other night about his strong feeling that Harold's ability is rooted in a really, I mean, a word that's not, I mean, I'm going to say the word, he has a freakish ability to allow the unconscious to come roaring through. In the same way as anyone who ever sits down with a blank page, something fills the page, or it's like good therapy. If you had a good hour of therapy, at the end you say, well, what happened? There's a space allowed for, what is not articulated to come through and begin to take some sort of form. But that Harold had a particular and freakish ability to. I mean, clearly he brought that into the world with him from wherever he came.
Yes, and he would never know. But as we were saying, the fact that he said that characters just come into his study. There they are, and he has to deal with them. Now that requires an extraordinary openness, a receptiveness, but that is what makes any great artist. You could say, well, this was my life and that informed me. And Harold would certainly say that things about his life, as with any of us, informed him. But the thing of actually characters, or of course, he felt a profound urge to speak. And that informed his political life as well. And so it's the same thing. This must be said. This person needs to be heard. And so that is what he stood up for, the right to be heard. And he was instrumental in making sure that for writers in trouble, for people all over the world, that right should be respected. Mm. But that's absolutely part of who he was as a writer, that these voices, whoever they are, whether they're admirable people or awful people, they must be heard. And yet at the same time, he was, I was going to say controlling, but maybe that's wrong. Was this extraordinary openness to what he might be channeling was definitely part of his writing, his ability to write. But in terms of work, the controlling aspect of Harold was that he didn't want unnecessary baggage. He would just get rid. So it's not really controlling. It's a kind of being a great editor. Mm. That we would look at the play, would do the play. You didn't do backstory. He wasn't interested, because I think he absolutely believed that what was there was enough. And so just we'd get on with it. Yes, but then, and of course, because his feelings, he had deeply held beliefs about the world, about the work, and because they were deeply held, he was very protective of them. And he was never someone to waste time. I suppose that applied to everything, in conversation, in work, in whatever. Now, some people saw that as a lack of tolerance, but actually it was an impatience with stuff that was not required. Yeah, and in those terms, he as a writer, he was that person. As a person, he was that writer. That he was spare in his use of words. Whether this was an encounter with someone, in a restaurant or in a rehearsal room, he was focused, always totally focused. Mm. So,
I mean, I always think, that one must never forget that his writing life began with poetry at a very early age, and that his first instinct was to try and create the essence of something. That's his first. It's like a centre forward, get it in the goal. He wants to find the essential as his primary objective, and that is from the age of 11 or 12. So there's that never leaves him, that imperative to create the essence of something. And nowadays, I've been thinking a lot about. We've been doing a kind of regular weekly gathering on Zoom when lockdown started, and so for 23 weeks now, a bunch of us have been meeting to discuss and read Harold's plays and rehearse a bit and just hang out with Harold. And when you come down, I've started to develop. I won't go on about it, but I've started to develop a sort of almost a quantum theory of Pinter, which is that when you get into that absolute essence, exactly like a quantum physicist looking at the smallest possible particle of matter, when you get that close to the essential, things behave differently. Things that you expected to behave a certain way start to have their own life, and a very mysterious life at that. And it's something to do with his focus of bearing down, insisting that we look at the absolute essence of what is happening at any given moment. And that is, in a way, that, you know, one of the greatest things you could say about Harold is, if unless the actors and the director have gone out of their way to literally release the potential of every moment, it's the danger is that something isn't truly happening, and our job is to make it happen in each moment. You know, that there is no moment where there isn't the essential event is happening, or the essential feeling. I mean, I don't know what I'm talking about, but I've been thinking about it a lot.
That's true, and I think you're referring to Harold's love of poetry and his strong connection with it, and as he began his writing with poetry, is absolutely relevant, because things are reduced to essentials, and woe betide you if you don't acknowledge that or learn from it. And it's I keep going back to this feeling that, you know, you have to address what's there. You speak the words, and over time you will accrue maybe some other things about it, and you nestle in and it become more real. But it's usually best to just do Harold. You know, because he's already got the essence. It's there. You just have to inhabit it. You have to embody it. That's your job. And if you do an awful lot of, you know, cartwheels and whatever and ever, I really believe that it reduces the writing and gets in the way and undermines you as an actor, and undervalues his writing, because it's all there. It's always true that great writers, and again, you know, the most obvious one is Shakespeare, great writers can teach you how to act, because if you just present yourself to the text, and it's much harder than it sounds, because our instinct is to demonstrate, especially when you feel terribly exposed, because you think, oh God, I feel like rubbish. You know, you feel exposed. But the more directly you address the writing and let it tell you what it's trying to tell you, rather like these people coming to Harold, the more powerful it will be. But it's really, really difficult. It's, you know, I've heard people trying to break up Shakespeare, you know, you think, and I mean, I'm not a purist, you know, in the broadest sense of the word, about writing performance, but you know, if you try to disrupt Shakespeare for a whole evening, it's a very painful and pointless experience, because there's a reason why it's written the way it's written, and your first task is to find out what that is, to recognize it, to meet the writing. And with Harold, again, I think found absolutely true. And when, you know, as you've been lucky enough to immerse yourself in his stuff recently, that must become more and more obvious, that it's there, isn't it? It's just, as you know, it's like something that is ready. It's just ready to go into motion. So you have to just get in the car and it will move. Yeah. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. You
repaint the car, or, you know, you just get in.
Yeah. You've got to have the key, though. You've got to be able to turn his engine on, and then it'll take care of business. And if you try it, you know, as sometimes happens these days, if you have a production which tries to do a take on Harold, and is sort of trying to put a key that isn't necessarily shaped exactly right. And then there's a sort of weird misfire, and the audience are baffled. And I mean, I've been in audiences, particularly in America, but also baffled audiences in London, in the UK, where audiences come away feeling that they have somehow, oh, we didn't get it, or we weren't intelligent enough, or whatever. And that is, in my judgment, the result of not surrendering sufficiently to Harold, to what's there. And usually it's when directors or whoever are a bit intimidated and a bit feel they've got to somehow impose themselves. And you simply can't, as Antonio always says, you can't compete with Harold. You've got to get out of his way.
Get out of his way. Yeah. Well, but what could be better? What could be better than just simply addressing that writing? I just remembered talking about audiences that a brutal reception for Ashes to Ashes in New York. The opposite of what I was saying about taking a play sometimes out of London, where people have come a little bit for checklist culture. Well, the subscription house, a model we don't really have in England, where people sort of buy. They subscribe to a theatre to support it because they don't have subsidy. And those theatres are really well-meaning for the most part, and they want to do good writing. But they, so these people can go, oh, I'll go to that. I've got 6. I bought 6. I'll go that play. And they came to see Ashes to Ashes. And that was hard. I mean, I said this many times, but that someone complaining to the box office about obviously having not quite managed to enjoy the play, going, that's more than $1 a minute. Actually, out by the yard, whatever. And such that the play was met with such bewilderment that we were asked to do, I was doing it then with David Strathairn in New York. We were asked to do a Q&A after the performance. And in the end, I said, I can't do this anymore because it's getting in the way of doing the play, because people desperately wanted to pin this down. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying every member of the audience, but, of course. But there is also that, when we're going slightly off the point here, but of course it affected the reception for Harold's play, which was that if you feel a sense of ownership about a piece of work, it kind of affects your relationship. There was a sense that we owed that audience, a better time, a clearer time, something like that. It's very subtle, but it can be a problem. Because, what you just said, that surrendering to a piece of work, to a piece of art, a bit of painting that you say, I don't know, what's it about? You don't know what it's about. But you know how you feel.
Or you don't know how you feel.
Or you don't know how you feel, but you will have some reaction to it. And it is possible that an unfettered reaction will be more interesting, equally valid, certainly. So, and I just think, Harold's work is like this extraordinary sort of, I don't know what the word for it is, a barometer, a metal detector, or something, a truth seeker maybe. You put it out there and you learn a lot about the people receiving it. Mm-hmm. And also about, how important it is to protect writers, to enable writers to put their work out into the world in a context where they can be heard, be that the production, the theatre, the setup, the whatever.
That seems to be getting harder and harder, doesn't it?
Yeah.
in a world that's at the moment still on a kind of more and more concrete trajectory, less and less poetry and more literalism and lack of metaphor, really.
Yeah, there's.
Lindsay, how did you find yourself cast in Ashes to Ashes in the first place? I mean, I know that Carol Rice directed it in New York, but how did you come to meet Harold for that play?
Well, because we'd already worked together. I can't quite remember the order of these things.
Oh, I thought Ashes came first. Maybe I've got the order wrong. Was it the Homecoming first? No, it wasn't the Homecoming first because he offered you the Homecoming while you were rehearsing Ashes to Ashes, if I've read that correctly.
Oh yeah, probably. Yes, that's true. Actually, yes.
And then Celebration in the Room came in about 2000. So.
Yeah. So I had. I was directed by him a long time ago in a play called Incident at Tulse Hill at the Hampstead Theatre. And that was the first time I met him. I suppose I just don't even know my dates on this.
Well, that was late 70s, wasn't it? Or mid 70s. Robert East's play, anyway. I'll put it up on the screen, but
anyway, I went to meet him, and I don't know how that came about. But anyway, I was cast in that. So then he, he knew me from that, and I think I just don't know. I remember being sent to them. I think I was in New York at the time, working, and was sent Ashes to Ashes. So it just came, and I mean, that overwhelming feeling. It's always when you get a piece of work that you really want to do. But actually, with Harold's, it's sort of almost physical. That, that's the way I feel about it. One of his plays comes in, it is physical. I immediately feel incredibly emotional, and
well, Ashes, it's a gut. The whole play is a gut.
Yes, absolutely. But I do feel that with all of his work, it just it has an emotional and physical effect on me, and I read it, and I think that would happen to lots and lots of actors who read his work. You just think, try and stop me from doing this. Nothing will stop me from doing this. I mean, in order to do the Homecoming, I had to do some terrible, contractual wriggling. My agent had to about something, because I just thought, I have to do this. And I was actually. Harold and I went to a bookshop together. We went to Foyles on Charing Cross Road to get me a copy of it, because I hadn't read it. Extraordinary to me, really, now that I hadn't read it. Again, Harold being very focused. We'd had lunch together, talked about this, and he was determined, and so he accompanied me to Foyles to get a copy of his play. Again, I've said this before, but to be standing in Foyles, looking at the person at the till who's saying, "Oh, just see if I've got a copy of that," and facing them is Harold Pinter. I mean, it's bizarre. It's sort of bizarre and wonderful that Harold would actually put himself in that position, and not being sure if there was a copy in a London bookshop of Harold Pinter's The Homecoming. Anyway, that was amusing to both of us. But it was, I think, and many actors would say this. They would. Go to any lengths to be involved with him, and because there is no experience like it, because he he was unique as a writer and unique as a person, and goes without saying. And the experience is so intense in the most orderly way.
That's, yeah. I mean, thank goodness he was directing Ashes to Ashes, because I mean, I've directed it on radio, but to be the first people to create those parts, you and Stephen, and to be with Harold, my God, thank goodness he was in the room. But what do you remember about the discovery process day by day of Ashes to Ashes? You've said in the past that you feel haunted by Rebecca. Is that still true?
Yes, I'd do it again tomorrow if I could. I mean, I'm too old now, but you know, some plays get under your skin, and you know, I think parts of it hit, parts of it, I say missed is a bit crude, but you know, it's a very, very difficult play, as you all know, to fully achieve. And I suppose I still feel, having done it in 2 productions, that it eluded me, eluded us. I'm proud of having done it, and I'm not saying that it was, you know, all wrong at all. I'm not saying that, but it's mysterious and elusive. But I mean, Stephen and I knew each other. We worked together before, and so there's a great deal of trust and affection between us. And the same, you know, with Harold, we were a very collaborative, trusting triangle. And I love when it's just a few of you. You know, it's so intense and so exciting and dangerous as well. And but I do, you know, I do remember that the one thing that he discovered and was right about, and came and went with me, is that the very, very end of the play, when Rebecca starts to talk, and there's almost stream of consciousness, and you know, he keeps saying, just drive it, drive it, drive it. It's like a train, you know, that image of the train. You just drive it through. And of course, he was so right about that, because, and it's true often, when you linger, with Harold's work particularly, when you linger, you know, too much, because you think, oh my God, this is really important, this is carrying so much, you will diffuse it. And Harold's instinct as actor-writer was so correct. You just push it through, almost with a violence. And that, you know, so that was something that was discovered during the course, and which was something I can easily remember because it was so useful and so correct.
And that's the section with the echo, correct?
Yes.
And did you were you your own echo? Was it your voice?
Yes.
So you had to create that so that you could drive it and allow the moment of the echo to come back. Yes.
I mean, I don't have any memory of the tech. I don't remember, you know, what happened there. But of course, it's a very powerful effect. And also, you know, this woman who is both present and elsewhere throughout the play, and then vocally, she's present and elsewhere. It's extraordinary that, you know, 2 people in one place can bring so much of the rest of the world in, which is what Harold was able to do. And I think that was the thing, you know, that to very complicated because to create a relationship where they were people who knew each other, in order to have the departure, you have to have the presence of each other together, as she slips away from him all the time until more and more and more. And that's quite a tightrope act, because you don't want to just play kind of spooky wooky. It's again that thing they were saying earlier, you have to be in it, present. So the reality for her is always reality. It's she's wherever she's talking about, she is there. Yeah. But also they're in this room together, and just the complexity of their relationship, the fact that you have to believe that they do know each other and that he knows her and yet he doesn't know her.
And something's happened to her just before the play starts. Something, there's been some sort of separation or crisis just before the play begins, it seems to me. And he's constantly...
that thing that she is, whatever she says. And she's there in whatever it is. Actually, Hilton, my husband, and I did a tiny excerpt from it, in the early lockdown days when everyone was saying, could you put something out online for this, for that? This was for Faber and Faber. And so we did a tiny bit of it. And it was so interesting, gorgeous to be back in that play, I must say, but also how difficult it was, even with a tiny snippet. It was so difficult not to tip too far into. It's so delicate because her withdrawal is not for effect. So it's a real thing, her withdrawal.
Yeah, for her it's absolutely real.
It's absolutely real.
But for him it's real, but in a totally opposite way, because he's
chasing.
He's losing her.
He's losing her, he's chasing her. And yet, you don't, her elusiveness, her withdrawal, her being somewhere else can't be, as I said before, some kind of spooky weirdo thing. It's not. She is literally there. And again, you've got to pin yourself in the words all the time, inhabit them. It's a real exercise. Well,
you said tightrope. I totally get that listening to you. Also, one word that Harold sometimes used to use is quicksand, that there's a sort of feeling of the danger always of being enveloped in something, and keeping one's head up in the air where the play is happening rather than getting sucked underneath.
Yes. And again, that's interesting you use that, because I talked earlier about the effect his plays have on me, which is physical. And he was giving quicksand, which is a very physical idea, isn't it, of what can happen to you. And I think there is almost a physical struggle sometimes to stay on the tightrope. Because if you do, you slide into self-indulgence so easily, into commentary, into being, into thinking you're fascinating, which you can do in, any piece of acting all too easily. But with him, there's almost a physical and mental rigor required.
There's a wonderful Arthur Miller play called Broken Glass. I don't know if you know it, but there's a woman in it in 1930, or whenever Kristallnacht happened. She's in Brooklyn, and she reads in the newspaper. She's Jewish, and she reads in the newspaper about Kristallnacht, and she loses the use of her legs spontaneously. She becomes paralyzed, and a doctor happily turns up, and he knows, he kind of knows what's wrong with her. But Miller was using a medical thing called hysterical paralysis. It's a real thing, and shock, trauma, and so forth can produce. I mean, like Rose in the room, the spontaneous loss of her eyesight is a reaction, not least to what's just happened in front of her, which is a brutal murder. So, But what I'm trying to get at is, I wonder whether you and Harold ever talked about what's happening to Rebecca in a clinical way, or in a
No.
psychological sense.
No.
We've noticed how many characters in Harold's plays are going through tremendous mental disturbance, and Rebecca is clearly one of them.
Yes, absolutely. The most literal thing, as I remember, that came up early on is that he said people who'd read the play had wondered if Rebecca had lost a baby. And he said, "I'm just asking you." And I said, to me, that's too specific. I didn't feel the need for that kind of specificity, because it's hard to talk about, but I felt that the writing was powerful enough and conveyed something to me of such terror, grief, loss that was universal, and that I didn't need to believe in a miscarriage in order to believe in what she said and where she was. I was happy to accept that. So is it a breakdown? I don't know. Is it a personal loss which has connected her to the great losses of this world? I don't know. But it's bigger than two people in a room. It is, and if it's useful to you to think that it's someone who's lost a baby, then it is. But interesting that he told me very honestly that it was other people who had floated this idea to him, asked him, and he just simply, again, it's that sort of the objective Harold standing back from his play and asking the actress who's going to play it, is that of any use? Does it mean anything? What do you think? And I suppose I don't know what would have happened if I'd said, yes, I think that's very useful. Then he probably would have said, well, fine. But I can't imagine that there would have been a long discussion about miscarriage. I'm not being facetious. I don't think there would have been any discussion about that. It would be something that he offered if it was useful. And, again, it's something that he might have thought if it was helpful, it's helpful, realizing that this is a kind of huge canvas for two people to work on. But that's the thing I remember about specifics.
Mm-hmm. There is a sort of unwritten rule for me with a lot of Harold's work. I work with a lot of students and young people who come to Harold for the first time, and they produce fantastic and often fantastical propositions as to what's happening or what someone might be thinking. But the unwritten rule is if it's not supported in the text, if it's not actually referenced, you're probably not going to get very far with that idea. Can you find as strong an idea in the words, in what's on the page?
Yeah, because they will teach you pretty much everything. And, if you're finding stuff difficult as an actor, we have a sort of ragbag of things to do when you're lost or blank or feel untruthful, and I think you know, if that helps, then use it on your own, to help you. But fundamentally, address the writing and listen to it and embody it and feel what it does to you and think, that could be what he meant. So make sure that those words are conveyed.
Yeah. And
clear.
Usually subtext comes out of a very brave attack to what's on the surface. Usually subtext is a reward for courage and walking into the unknown.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's very true. Very true. And often, you know, but anger can be the result of fear. I mean, we know that. We know that that is very, very often the case. And that is so often the case in Harold's work. But you don't play the fear, you play the anger, because that will immediately alert an audience, for instance, to the fact that something's going on there, you know, and because the truthful thing is the anger. That's what the human being's got. And you'll discover probably that it is to do with, it's driven by fear. That's an obvious example.
I've just sort of been struck by these four amazing women that you played: Rose, Prue, Rebecca, Ruth. All four are in. I mean, Harold is very interested in marriage. In fact, there are two married couples in his very first play, The Room, Mr. and Mrs. Sands and Rose and Bert. But the marriages of your four Pinter women are particularly tricky, aren't they? I mean, Rose and Bert, Ruth and Teddy, Prue and Lambert. My God. And then Devlin and Rebecca. These are women under extraordinary pressure from men. From them.
Well, there are also women who sort of take a walk on the wild side in different ways, but they're certainly not examples of blissful communication, are they? But that would be boring. That would be quite boring.
No, it would. But I mean, it's interesting.
But yeah, Rose. I mean, yes, Rose is a very, very tiny little constrained, damaged woman. It's very painful. Very painful.
Who seems to have gone into that confinement in order to have a grain of what she thinks might be security.
Yes, looking for security. Ruth is I think a different thing altogether. I mean, in a way, I suppose, looking for, I don't know about security. I think maybe, you know, along the way she finds power, and that's very seductive. And she uses seduction to gain power and test her strength. And she's a disruptor, I think. Prue, well, Prue. Yeah, I still don't know quite what I think about Prue. It's sort of interesting that she, you know, for me, maybe the least vivid woman of those, but you know, very much part of the group.
Right.
They were sort of, yes, this rather disgusting group.
I like your disruptor word, because when Prue goes up to the manager and says, I want to thank you personally, she's being rather disruptive herself at that moment.
Oh, totally. Yeah, I mean, she can take over, no trouble at all. Yeah, and Rebecca is at the mercy of events, but she is obviously completely available to them for whatever reason, whether that's her own hurt and whatever. But she is available, isn't she? She's receptive. She's missing a few layers of skin. Yeah.
Well, I suppose I'm partly proposing in my drawing of these marriages into one sort of clump, that to some extent these women have been subjected to a kind of marital flaying, and enough's enough in one way or another, or at least that there's an impulse to fight back.
I mean, I actually don't feel that about Rebecca, but I don't feel it's fighting back. Of course, he's painted as, I think we used to describe him as an intellectual thug.
Who devil?
Yeah, I mean, he's clever and he knows it and he wants to use it, and he wants to control his wife. But I don't. I'm going to have to stop soon. I've got to go to the osteopath. I don't. No, I don't think that was the driving force. I think it's you can look at it in different ways. It's an illustration of the shock for that man when a woman goes literally somewhere else. But where the other place that she goes to is extremely deep and extremely painful. It's not a relief from where she was before.
No. I suppose I'm proposing that these women go where they go because partly of who they're married to and what they've had to endure. I suppose that's what I'm just mulling it, really.
Yeah, maybe. I'm sorry, I've really got to go.
Let me ask you last question. If you had to direct one, what would you choose?
Oh, probably Ashes to Ashes. Not because the favourite, or I suppose because I'm not a director for not one cell of my body, I don't think. But because it haunts me, and because there are only two people in it, I might be able to manage that.
And why didn't you and Alan Rickman do Old Times after that? There was a moment
they gave the
New
theatre.
York.
They gave the theatre. We were going to do it at was the old club, the famous club space.
Theatre Club.
No, much cooler. Studio 54, and we very much wanted it to be in a kind of space like that. Then I can't even remember what, because I suppose rather healthily I've managed to let it go, though at the time it was devastating to both of them, and to Harold as well. He was furious.
But anyone
they gave it away. They gave it away, and we were offered another space, which was simply not like that. Not like that kind of found space experience, and so it was a shame.
Eternally tantalising to have that one scene from the National Theatre tribute of you and Alan and Gina. I mean, it's so utterly riveting and funny.
Well, that's nice, and I would have, that of course that haunts me, that play, again, because I can never do it now, and I of course would have given anything to do it, but we did it. We did that little excerpt, and that was gorgeous, and we read it, the whole play together, and there it is. It's just the one that got away. But listen, there were enough that didn't get away, and that's means a huge amount.
Oh, Lindsay, thank you. Bless your heart. That was such a beautiful conversation and great privilege for me, and I know other people.
No, it's lovely to talk about him, isn't it? And endlessly interesting. It just makes me want to go and do some of his work again. It's just so.
May it be so. May it be so. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Take care.
Bless
Bye.
you.
Thank you. Bye.